Hi, I'm Alex. I thought it might be fun to go over my experiences and tribulations of creating a Conlang or constructed languages. Yes, I said that with a really weird accent that clearly is not normal to me. I don't know what that was, but this would be story time with tea, but I finished it all. Forgive my filthy cup. I have had way too many of these today. To start with, I was woefully unprepared. I knew there were going to be certain things that I had to do, like grammar, alphabets, that sort of thing. The things you standardly think of with a language. I was not ready for just how much went into this. There is so much more to creating a language than I realized. And now, that being said, do I regret making the choice to create a language? Actually, technically, I'm creating two languages, but it's like one language and then one's like a derivative of it. So it's different, but they have similar. It's a whole thing, I'm sure. What have I figured out thus far from it? Phonetics are confusing. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, phonetics are the sounds that we use to speak. Like the letter C, yes, technically the romanized letter C, can be said as k, like k, or it can be soft like s, more like an S, like spice. That s sound, both those sounds are phonetic for that letter. It's also kind of like if you're writing a word out phonetically, you're writing it out the way it sounds. So it's a whole thing. And if you look, every language has kind of some variant of its own phonetics. It's really fascinating actually to get into, but at the same time, it is super confusing. Especially when you have to sit there and pick the phonetics. Now, my two languages are based on Korean and Chinese phonetics with a bit of English tossed in just to make it something I understand a bit easier. Mostly because I'm learning Korean and I really like the language, so I wanted my language to have similar sounds to it. But because of that, there are actually certain symbols they use to represent each sound, which is when you look in a dictionary and it's how the word, they have the word and then it's like in slashes and then it's like SP and a funky E and then like that's the phonetic spelling of, those are the symbols to represent those sounds. It's a whole confusing thing. There is actually which then led to the fact that there is a lot to think about when creating a language. Not only do you have to think about what you want it to sound like. So for me, I wanted it to have that sort of soft and yet not quite soft sound. I don't know how many of you have heard the Korean language. It's soft because there aren't a lot of, they're like, they don't have X sounds, they don't have Z's, they don't have F's, but they do have like G's, K's, those sort of sounds. So it's soft, but not really. And then the Chinese sounds are very soft because like they'll have they'll have that sort of flowy melodic sound to it. So not only do you have to think about that, you have to think about the grammar, which it has been a while since I've been in an English class. So grammar, like my own language grammar, I don't remember a lot of. So to have to think of if someone, like, create one is like, can someone point me in the direction of a grammar book, please? Then you have to think about things like, do you want your language to be alphabetic or syllabic? No, not syllabic. My apologies. Maybe it is. Basically, do you want it to be like, English is an alphabetic language. So every sound is a letter. Whereas Chinese and I think technically Korean, but I'm not sure, Korean might be kind of a weird mix of the two, is whereas we take letters to create sounds, so like if we want to make a TH sound, we'll just put the T and we'll put the H. But in Chinese, the T then, like every sound that can be possibly made with a T. So TS, TH, T has its own symbol. So they don't just take a T and an H and put it together and you have that sound. Like every single sound has its own symbol. That's why they have so many characters, because I don't remember the word for their writing system, to their language, because every single possible sound has its own symbol. So you have to think about that. You have to think about things like the writing system, and that's its whole thing together too, because like depending on what they have available to write with, how their culture evolved, like all those things go into how it's written. And then you've got to think about things like what kind of words do they have. I do apologize for continuing to go back to Korean, but I'm actually learning Korean, I'm trying to teach myself Korean, so it's constantly on mind. Where we have the word tears, and it is just tears. Korean has a word for tears, which is nunmul. But it's actually two words. Nun, which is eye, and mul, which is water. So their word for tears is eye water. But you have to decide whether you want your language to have a single word that is not taken from anything, like sky, or do you want it to have words that are two separate words brought together to create a new meaning? Again, I come back to Korean because their word for fish is sea meat or something like that. Like but you have to decide if you want. It's generally, even our own language, I keep saying I do apologize for saying our own because I'm making generalizations. The English language has its own words that do that, but in day-to-day conversation, I find that there are far fewer of them. When you're creating your language, you have to decide how many of those type of words are in there. If you want that to be where you have one main idea word and then any word that might relate to it then is a joint word off of that. There's a lot that goes into thinking about putting that together. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't have the answers for a lot of that with my language. I do know that from what I understand, a language is more believable when you when you take inspiration, grammatical rules, that sort of thing, from a language, like a real language. Which is why some of my basis for it is Korean, Chinese, that sort of thing, because I want that feel into my language. Another thing that I've discovered in my research. There is a difference between creating a language that is passable and a language that is speakable. What do I mean by that? There is a difference between creating a language that a reader goes, oh, yeah, okay, that's a language that's real in this world. It passes as a language because there's a word here, a word there. It's not really written out. It's not a living language, so to speak. And then there's a speakable language. When it comes to speakable languages, we think of things like, if you look at Tolkien, Quenya, you look at Star Trek, you're looking at Vulcan, Klingon. These are languages that there was enough of them, or there was enough of it spoken, written in the world that they could then continue to grow, and you could infer rules, and the language could continue to live outside of a few spoken words. There are plenty of books out there where the language may be one or two words written here or a word there, but it's not really, there's not enough there for the language to thrive. Whereas some books, it is spoken enough, mentioned enough, whatever, that anyone who wants to could sit there and go, oh, well, I see grammatical rules starting to show up, and I can infer certain words from this. Oh, you can see the language where it comes together. A lot of languages that we now think of as those nerdy people learning them languages, which I say that as someone who, I would love to learn Vulcan. I would love to teach myself Quenya. I have too many languages I want to learn, and not all of them are from the real world. A language that is passable really is just believable within the story, whereas a speakable language is something that will live beyond the book. And in truth, I would like to create a speakable language. I would love to be able to have some overzealous teenager come up to me and say something in my language and to be able to respond back to them in that language. That would be amazing. That would be the coolest thing ever. That is something I didn't realize was a thing going into writing this language. That there's really sometimes just enough there to make it like, oh, okay, they speak another language. Whereas sometimes there's an entire backstory to it, or not even a backstory, but there's enough there to make a language out of. And that's the other thing, is that your language will never be 100%. If your language is speakable and if people are interested enough, your fans or the people who read your story will start inferring and helping your language continue to grow in a very natural way that we see in a lot of languages now. I can only speak for English because that's what I speak, but if you look at the English language, we've had a lot of new words come into our language. Do I agree that all of them should be words? No, but that's not the point. Language is a living thing that will continue to grow on its own, whether you want it to or not. And your language will do the same. And I think that's great. I think that's amazing. I would love to see that for my language. These were things I didn't think about until I started looking into and creating it. Rating systems are hard. When I started this, I started with what I thought was going to be an alphabet. And it still is. But originally I was just sketching out little symbols that could be the alphabet. Whether I had them or not, I thought I could at least give myself an idea. Because these were running into that problem of how much do I give away versus how much I don't. For lack of a better way of explaining it, the elves, which are kind of like a cross between elves and Gumiho, English. Fox spirits? I think that would be the best translation. I'm not 100% on. Some things don't translate as well as others. If you know Japanese myth, the kitsune, they're kind of like a cross between elves and them. They're forest dwellers, most of them. So I wanted the writing system to show that. I wanted it to almost have like a leafy, viney look to it. So I was sketching out things, and as I was sitting there doing it, I was like, this is something that has to be replicable. Not only does it have to be replicable, but it has to be something that someone can sit there and write without, it needs to be smooth. It needs to be something that, even if it's not like cursive, even if it's just like drawing a symbol, moving on to the next one, it needs to be something that's easy to do. Because part of being a smooth line of movement is that it can flow into itself. And I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be to come up with that. I still actually haven't figured out a way to do it, especially considering I spent a lot of time looking at Elven for a while. I have to fight my natural instinct to write like that. But it's actually much more difficult than I thought, and I don't even want to think about when I have to get into the language that's written in. Essentially, it's like the same language of that flowy, but instead of being flowy, it's like in hard, blocky lines. Like, what did I do to myself? It's a lot to take in when you start to do. And I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Do I regret it? No, I really don't. I'm fascinated by the things I'm learning. I'm enjoying the process 100%. I enjoy what it's helping me learn about the people that I'm creating. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work that I wasn't thinking I was going to have to do, but I'm enjoying every minute of it. So no, I don't regret doing it, and I will probably continue to do it even beyond this story. It's something that you can kind of work on in bits and pieces as you have time, or just when you want to sit down and work on something. It's different. Let me know down below. Have you ever created a language? Are you interested in creating one? Would you ever consider it? Are you interested in seeing more of my language as I figure it out? Let me know, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.